At the end of the day, you can talk about PG, you can talk about building a champion, you can talk about qualifying a deal, but like, are you really doing it? And I think for me, I had this mental change that was, no one is going to waste my time.
Welcome to Hunters and Unicorns, live from Las Vegas with Raw Stories Live. I'm Simon Kutis and I'm joined by my co-host Ollie Kune.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show.
And it's with great pleasure that we introduce you to Tim Moxness. Moxie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, fellas.
Welcome to the show,
Good to see you,
Moxie.
fellas. Good to see you.
By way of an introduction, you are VP of Sales at Tessell.
Yes.
In this episode, really excited to tell this story because it was a real turning point in your career, which helped you go from a moment of despair to closing over 10 million in a year. But take us to those early challenges. Take us right to that moment of where it all kind of began for you.
Yeah. I mean, precursor, right? I joined AppDynamics. It was my first startup. I was super spoiled in retrospect, right? It was just a great organization. So I started as a BDR. I was paid half of what everybody else was. So I eventually found out on the sales floor. But earned my stripes, and I just kind of tried to be a sponge because you've had a lot of the people on the show that work there, right? So there's a world-class talent trying to soak everything up. End up getting, after 18 months of being inside rep, ended up getting a shot. It was go to the field. So I'm sitting up there. I think I was 25 at the time, and scrappy team. I had a great VP who was helping me out. But at the end of the day, you're going to need to figure it out yourself. So the first year was about 75% of my number, which again, everyone wants to hit 100%, but as a brand new field rep and in greenfield patch, I was actually pretty pumped. Then the second year came, and I think that's really where a lot of the story comes. They brought in a new director at that point, and he was a great guy, first-time director, and it was at the end of the fiscal year. It was about 85% of my number, and I have a deal that can get me to 250% of my no. And you learn a lot, but ultimately that deal ended up not coming in. And he's a good guy. But ultimately, when that happened, kind of turned internally, and the response was, "Well, we thought that was going to happen." And again, I don't slight that. I don't slight that person, but this type of thing will put you into a tailspin, and I think that's kind of where the story turned.
How did you feel at that moment? Obviously, you've got a lot riding. You're on the cusp of your second year, right? So you want to impress, you want to do well, but what was at stake, and how did you feel in that moment?
Well, I think part of me thought I was going to get fired, right? I mean, it was a pretty tough sales environment. At the end of the day, you're responsible for delivering on your number. But was fortunate that, people thought I was doing all the right things, which I thought I was doing all the right things. And so that's probably one. Two is you have this perception that these other people are getting these deals falling from the tree, or it's easy, quote unquote, which I guarantee everybody feels that way, but it's not. And mostly it was one of those things where you want to win the race, right? You want to finish first. You want to beat your healthy competition, which is your peers. And so a lot of those just didn't come true, right? So I think then at that point, having all those things compounding, part of me went to the negative side, right? So you get bombarded on LinkedIn. So started turning some calls, started talking to a few people.
So you were disillusioned by this point. At this point, you were thinking, is this for me? Or were you thinking, maybe this isn't the right company for me? What was going through your mind at that moment?
I think in particular, right, and this is probably the moral of the story, I thought it was supposed to be easier, right? Part of you thinks it's supposed to be easier. You see all these other examples of other people making it look easy, but yet you haven't internalized the true motions to do what you're supposed to do. And so part of me just thought, yeah, it's probably easier somewhere else. And so that was what I was off to figure out a little bit. I remember I was actually close with a couple companies, and your wife is always your true sounding board here. But I think just talking out loud with her, a lot of me just said, what do you get from doing that, right? What do you get from quote unquote giving up? And the answer was nothing, right? That company was unbelievable. You were learning every day, and at the end of the day, you need to invest in yourself to make sure you harden every day. That's really what I chose to make that mental decision. I ended up, declining an offer and doing all that, and just no one really knew, right? But it got to work.
So you've emotionally now attached yourself to this opportunity. What were the things you started doing different at that point, and where does now the emotional attachment bring you, and what have you changed about, you know, your sales process and your strategy and your rigor, and talk us through some of those learnings.
Well, I think some of it too is, like, for me, a lot of it was learning on the job, right? But for me, it was no excuses, right? At the end of the day, you can talk about PG, you can talk about building a champion, you can talk about qualifying a deal, but like, are you really doing it? And I think for me, I had this kind of mental change that was, no one is going to waste my time, especially, and again, we love customers, it's why we do our job, but if they're not really into this, then I'm going to go and find something else. And I asked a lot of tougher questions. I actually embraced what it means to build and test a champion. So one of my favorite stories from that year was, we would do PG Mondays. It was in the office. It was, remember it vividly, I was in Chicago at the time. So it's, if you've ever been to River North, it's Kinsey Street.
Yeah.
And they had already done the work, so I'm not slighting it, but I watched my colleagues are walking into the bar, because literally we overlooked the street, and I see them walking to the bar, and it's 4 o'clock. I'm like, man, that looks awesome. I'd like to go do that. I was on call 48. I wasn't done with my 50 targeted calls and 50 targeted emails. And I'm, no joke, that 48th call, the guy answers, get him on his cell phone. I'd rehearsed the pitch. I knew the company well, and I got a meeting. And the meeting was for next week. And prepped very well. Turns out they had a very serious problem. We ended up getting a deal from that same cold call 3.5 months later, which at that was like unheard of, because we had longer sales cycles, a big operational sale. And that deal, I think, was 300 grand ARR. And they ended up expanding again 3.5 months later, because they saw what we were capable of doing. And I think the deal after I moved to Atlanta kept expanding from there. But it's just that those moments of, if I think about Tim, the year 2, I'd probably walk into that bar, and I just refuse to let myself off the hook.
So you've gone through that stage of disillusion, you've gone through that stage of now getting through that, emotionally attaching yourself to the opportunity, applying yourself, and then seeing results. And now you're at that point of seeing results. How does that now help perpetuate what you're doing and validate what you're doing?
Solidifies everything. I mean, it's not that I didn't believe before, but again, now I'm like, it's really making it happen. And from there, I just took that same kind of no time wasting attitude in every customer meeting in a respectful manner. I think one of the hardest things to do for a rep is really ask for the business stone cold, right? A lot of times you run the sales process just kind of assuming it's going to close. Well, the reality is, if it closed on time, they wouldn't need us, right? If it closed on a natural course, they wouldn't need us, right? So I went from that into all these other opportunities. I ended up closing, I think it was, doing the math, there's like 14 transactions, 5 monster net new logos in the scheme of 12 months. And I think I finished it was 302% of my number, which was awesome.
So what are the biggest lessons that you've taken from that experience? And help us understand a little bit about that.
I think at the end of the day, it's on you to own it, right? At the end of the day, no one's going to do it for you. I think there are some world-class sales organizations out there. We're trying to be one, where we're going to empower you to educate you. We're going to help you on all the calls and do all those other things. But at the end of the day, it's what happens on the off hours that, you know, you're by yourself. 2, the ability to actually ask and test a champion is something that everybody talks about. You have to embrace it in your own style and the way you feel comfortable and the way that you're actually going to drive towards a mutual timeline. This whole concept, I used to do a mutual action plan and kind of show it on the screen, be like, okay, let's move on. You have to do that stuff, right? So, and I think it was just the, also going from, and my old VP used to say this all the time, going from, instead of a rep, a business person, right? We are bringing value, we're helping solve problems, and we are in it to win it with you. But at the same time, you need to have mutual respect and mutual dialogue with that customer. And so that was, and those, again, are skills that sometimes come with age and sometimes comes with repetitions, and some people can do it faster and some people it takes longer.
Is this something that you now, so when you're going through those low points, is this a point in your career that you will always reflect on to help you in that inspirational moment when things are up and, well, things are down?
Yes. Yes. And again, that company was amazing, right? Not every company is created equal. So, but as long as you have everything, you know, from the product perspective, from the executive perspective, from the momentum perspective, and things are progressive. It might not always be up like this. It might go down or up like the stock market, but as long as you're going upper to the upper right, yeah, it helps me a lot. I've told this story to some of my teams that I've been fortunate to manage in the past.
I think it's a really valuable lesson, isn't it? It's finding that point in your career when the chips are going down, when things go wrong, but also holding on to that faith of when you've now turned that around, it's now going positive. Use that as a bit of a North Star and use that as an opportunity and an anchor point to inspire.
I imagine that despite that, you still feel those highs and the lows, right? But do you feel more resilient? And I think a lot of the time it might not come across that way, but you still feel those highs and lows. Of course you do.
Absolutely. In these worlds that we live in, it's never easy. Never, regardless of where you are. Any startup is going to have goods and bad days, regardless of how big or small you are. So for me, it's as long as the pieces are in place, just keep going, keep moving forward. Otherwise, you'll just keep doing the same thing over and over, and you're not going to change your destiny.
Well, Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for joining us today. Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate it. So to all our listeners, again, thank you so much for listening. If you do like what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. All the links are in the description below. And thank you very much. And can I also say a massive thank you to Harness for putting up with us on this stand. We have commandeered most of it, but also to PGAI, another big sponsor of ours. So thank you very much again for tuning in, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session soon. Thank you. Amazing.
We got to take that handshake out. That was brutal.
It was true, or is it?
I didn't have my eyes on the prize here.